in the past, there was the kind of mindset, there was somewhat of a trade-off, that as you push for digestibility, we might be losing on yield and tonnage and potentially inventory on the farm. But we're finding now that, like with new cultivars and management practices, we can actually generate just as much silage over the year, but have it of higher quality than going for those bulkier cuts.
I'm joined this week by Mike Dineen, Teagasc Senior Research Officer, whose work focuses on animal nutrition. Mike joins us to discuss the fundamentals to optimizing performance from freshly calved cows by making informed decisions around the winter diet. I suppose maybe to start, Mike, winter feed is obviously, it's a significant cost to produce in liquid milk, and therefore it's important maybe farmers get this piece right. Where does a farmer start when it comes to actually looking at diet formulation?
I suppose there's a couple of key principles to start with. A big one would be forage inventory. How much have you in the yard? What ingredients you have available? And then the second piece of that is the nutritive value. So testing those forages to see what kind of quality they are. That'll help you set up your kind of base diets then. How much forage you're going to feed. If you've grass silage and maybe maize silage, what combination are you going to target? And off the back of them, then you'll be looking at your concentrate feeding level, and you'll have to pay close attention to the costs of those ingredients, including your concentrates or potentially a protein mix or other alternative ingredients, and looking at milk price and seeing where you'll ultimately end up in terms of a margin and economic gain. And it can be slightly different every year, but it's important to take those into consideration and I suppose not just have a blanket diet that you target every single year. It should be changing based on forage quality, milk price and things like that.
And is it really about, I suppose when we look at these diets, it is really about optimizing performance rather than, as you said, maximizing it. You could run into a situation where you're not actually delivering the margin you're looking to achieve.
100%. It's very clear, we know as you feed more, especially concentrate, if you keep going up in level of concentrate, you'll be getting a response and that'll be diminishing as you go higher and higher. The bulk tank will still be going up, but like you mentioned there, is that profitable milk? Is that worth chasing and pushing and going after? And we've nice data now out there, we've good information to make that decision. And like you say, you have to optimize it rather than maximize it.
The forage quality piece, I suppose we're in early October. If farmers haven't quality analysis done, you'd be saying it needs to be done ASAP, Mike, to be fit to make in those informed decisions we're going to talk about.
I would, James. Yeah, no, 100%. I suppose it's something we don't do enough of in the country. I spent a couple of years over in the States, and it's very standard practice. They have lots of labs. They're set up well. They have a team of nutritionists. And that's probably heading too far the other way. But it's important. It's a very key thing. Like there is a cost. It's not a massive cost, but if you can understand, like if you've 2 or 3 pits on the farm or a couple of stacks of bales, if you can understand which ones are the highest digestibility and then prioritize them to the specific animal category. Like we know we'll have dry cows on the farm if we're split calving. We'll have the winter milk ladies that need the highest quality feed, and then we'll have different groups of heifers as well, and they need to be prioritized with different silages. And it can be tricky. There's a bit more thought process rather than just opening the one pit and going for it. You might need to tap into a certain pit for a certain group of animals, and you have to manage feed faces. But it's definitely, there's lots of strong data there to encourage it and show that it's beneficial to go after. So yeah, silage testing is key. You'll be looking at levels of fibre, you'll be looking at digestibility ultimately, and we're trying to drive that up for these lactating cows over the winter.
And maybe to start on that grass silage piece, how important is, I suppose, the digestibility of the silage when it comes to putting these diets together?
DMD is the one we use here in Ireland, dry matter digestibility. It's the most common metric, I suppose, out there. Across continental Europe and the US, they have different ways of testing it, but ultimately they're all trying to understand how much of the feed the cow consumes will be digested and absorbed and metabolized and used for milk. Ultimately, what doesn't end up in the feces. And for every bite the cow is eating, you want her to digest and absorb as much of it as possible. Like, we don't want it coming out as feces. So for DMDs, again, there's lots of good experiments out there here in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, Scandinavia, the US, all showing that cows respond really well to high digestibility silages. And I suppose in the past, there was the kind of mindset, there was somewhat of a trade-off, that as you push for digestibility, we might be losing on yield and tonnage and potentially inventory on the farm. But we're finding now that, like, with new cultivars and management practices, we can actually generate just as much silage over the year, but have it of higher quality than going for those bulkier cuts and ultimately returning economically. So, yeah, if we're to dig into it, we know, like, in terms of silage digestibility, as you push from maybe a 70 through a 75 up to a 79 or 80, then the cows will be responding. Like, there's work there showing cows on 8 kilos of ration with a low quality silage doing about 27 kilos of energy corrected milk. As you push up to those really high quality silages, you could be picking up 4 or 5 kilos of energy corrected milk up to 32 and a half. So there's good responses to it. You'll see the cows, they'll pick up a bit of intake. They'll get that digestibility. It'll drive volatile fatty acid and energy production, and also microbial protein growth and metabolizable protein supply, and that'll drive your milk solids for the animals.
And how you touched on it there in terms of how does concentrate supplementation, how does it interact with silage digestibility and I suppose influence cow performance during that winter period?
It's an important one, a very important one to consider. It's tricky to do here on the podcast. Ideally, we'd have a slide and you could kind of look through it. But we've seen work where, say, you've 3 different silage qualities. If you have that really high digestibility silage, the cow is getting a lot of her requirements from that high quality silage, both her energy and her protein. So as you push up through the range of concentrate, say going from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, you're probably hitting a maximum return there, or an optimized return on supplementation. You're kind of allowing her to express her potential. And as you push further on beyond there, you're probably overcooking that silage to a degree. The cow won't respond as well to those last few kilos as she would have the initial kilos on that high quality silage. As you move down the silage qualities, then the cow will continue to respond at those higher concentrate levels. So going towards that 8, maybe 9, even 10 potentially, she could respond to it. But we're going in with a very expensive feed to correct maybe a management issue that we should have solved earlier on in the season, and really prioritize that high quality silage. So it's kind of like it's similar in the spring calving system. We see and we talk about response to concentrate, and a high response to concentrate might necessarily be a good thing. It's reflecting on the silage quality or the quality of the rest of the diet. And if you're getting a big response to that concentrate, you're potentially losing out or missing an opportunity on the silage quality. And just to go back to the silage quality, James, there's a few key things we can do there to get it right, and a big one obviously is cutting date. The earlier in the year we can go, we know that'll be higher digestibility, and weather can hit us there. It's a very challenging country to grow and make silage in, but like all our silage doesn't have to be that really high digestibility. So if we target a few paddocks and an early cutting date, we might be pushed a week, but we can still go after it. Like, really focus on going after that early in the year. You're talking kind of late April, early May into mid-May as your kind of window, and beyond that then it's hard to make that good quality silage as a first cut. Other things then are like getting your grassland, your silage paddocks reseeded. We know high quality PPI grasses, they'll grow faster in the spring, they'll get to that yield we're targeting, and they'll be high digestibility because they'll get there sooner in the year. Soil fertility can help us achieve that too. The soil fertility itself mightn't affect DMD, but it'll get the spring growth going for us. And then just things like fertilizer timing, being organized, having your split out early enough that you're not waiting around for that nitrate to come out of the grass. You're not double guessing yourself. You're able to pull the trigger, get the contractor in, and get that silage made. And the last one then on the DMD is just good preservation. We go to all the hard work and effort to make that good quality silage. It's important to do the basics right, like cutting in the afternoon to get your sugars up, sealing the pit well and getting it in fast, and having enough rolling pressure, I suppose, or loader pressure to get that good fermentation.
Yeah, I think you made a point there as we went. Your average quality or poor quality silage is maybe often misunderstood. You will have a higher response to concentrate on those, but I suppose you're ending up with higher overall diet costs and ultimately lower animal performance because the basis of your diet is a lower quality feed. Some other things then maybe that often pop up, maize silage is often another forage that's fed on winter milk farms. What are the important considerations when it comes to maize silage?
Yeah, so maize, it's a very common one out there, I suppose, in the winter milk circles. You can grow a nice tonnage per hectare. It's a lower protein, higher fermentable carbohydrate or high starch ingredient. So it can work in a winter milk system with grass silage and a protein mix maybe. But again, back to the testing, I suppose, the nutrient value analysis, like we say maize silage, but maize silage can be very variable, and anyone feeding it knows that year to year, crop to crop. Thankfully, this year now, we seem to have had a very good growing season. The kernels have filled. The weather's been good to harvest it, and it's testing well. We're getting dry matters in around that 30, 31, 32%. The plant dried down well. And then the starches are coming in around that 30, 31, 32 as well. So we're getting that nice cob formed, a nice amount of starch in it. So that's what you're trying to target with your maize silage, really, those high starch levels. And as you have more starch, that's going to dilute out the fiber or the NDF, which you don't want a lot of. We already have enough fiber in our grass silages and our maize silages. You really want to try drive the starch. And if you can get a crop like that, maize silage makes a lot of sense in terms of animal performance. If you have those 30% starch maize silages, you'll drive dry matter intake, you'll pick up a bit of milk yield, and you'll see a milk protein percent when it replaces moderate quality grass silage. So there's kind of two considerations there. You need really good quality maize silage. And when it's being used to replace some grass silage, if you're replacing really good quality grass silage, you won't see as much of a response. Kind of like that concentrate, as you put in concentrate to poor quality silage, you get a bigger response. Same thing with your maize silage. The other massive one there is price. You really have to sit down and do the sums and make sure that it's making sense. We've seen maize silage crops come into Johnstown Castle there as low as 19, 20% starch versus 30, 31%, 32% starch. And they'll feed very differently. And ultimately the return on those, or the margin on those, will be different as well. So you need to consider the cost of bringing in that crop and the milk price as well.
I suppose with any alternative feeds, forages, it does add a level of complexity, Mike. And as you say, if the basis is really, really good quality grass silage, is there anything wrong with a very, very simple diet in terms of grass silage plus concentrate?
Yeah, to be honest, James, for me, there isn't. There's a lot of good data in Scandinavia where they don't lean on maize silage as much, and they've shown, similar performances on a good quality grass silage, but that grass silage has to be good quality then, really high DMD. Try and make that stuff with concentrate, an optimized level of concentrate. It can be just as good as that moderate maize silage. But yeah, it really just comes down to price and costs. And then through with the maize silage, you're going to be bringing in more labor. It'll force you down the mixer wagon situation. It's much harder to feed out those two forages together rather than a simplified grass silage diet. So yeah, it can be specific to every situation. It's hard to give blanket advice on it, but it's really sit down, test it, understand the price, try get a good understanding. Are the cows responding to it, and seeing where the margin is then ultimately.
But what about assessing, we'll say, other alternative feeds? We sometimes hear about brewers' grains, a bit fodder beets. Maybe not to get into big detail, Mike, but is there ways that farmers can, as you said, look at the prices of them? Are they good value? And I suppose, as you said there, what sort of complexity are they actually going to add in terms of storage, mixing, feeding? But is there a simple way where farmers can look at, are they good value, are they not good value?
Yeah, so I suppose there's two nice Teagasc resources on that front. Peter Doyle and Grange and the team, they've done some nice kind of feed costs analysis there, and they update them year on year. And they're looking at the costs of something like grazed grass, grass white clover swards, all the way through your two cut pit silage, your maize silage, and something like beet pulp. They put a cost analysis around it, and they take in some of those assumptions, in terms of storage and feed out. And even just looking at that work, it makes you think deeper, not just the cost of getting it dropped in the yard. It allows you to think through the dry matter of it, the cost of handling it, and then they'll bring it further to even like UFL or relative energy value. So that's a nice bit of analysis, specifically for the maize, the beet, and the grass silages. And then Teagasc also have the relative value feed calculator online as well. So you can pop in different prices, and it can compare it relative to things like barley. It can take UFL into account, protein, and give you a relative feed value of those different ingredients. On this specific ingredients, that one is a really challenging one. Every different yard you go into has a different situation and access to these ingredients. But again, it'll come down to price, making sure it's coming in at the right price, that the feed is of decent quality. Something like brewers' grains will be high in fiber, so ultimately that has the potential to replace maybe other high fiber ingredient like grass silage or maize silage. But then in terms of costing, if it's coming in like a concentrate, it can really add or push up those feed costs. So you have to consider that part as well. And then something like beet pulp, low protein, high energy, lots of sugars. There's additional costs there. You'll have to balance off that bit of extra protein, similar to maize silage. It might be 8% crude protein. You might have to come in with a little more soya or field beans or rape to offset that lower protein. So there's a kind of a hidden cost there as well. And then, of course, minerals, it's something to watch as well. Those ingredients can be differing levels of calcium and phosphorus, and we need to refine our rations there to watch that as well and make sure we're not just meeting energy and protein, but also mineral nutrition of the cows. So, yeah, it kind of comes down to price, the feed value of it, and then just like the maize, is the additional complexity and labor going to deliver a margin for your situation?
Yeah. From a feed management perspective, then, I suppose, how do farmers ensure they're delivering high levels of efficiency, but also getting high levels of dry matter intake? Is there a few things you'd say to farmers there just to watch out for, in terms of managing that this winter?
Yeah, so I suppose so far we've kind of focused very nutritionally, digestibility, balancing with concentrates and optimizing the feeding levels there, the value of maize silage. But there's a lot of other kind of nutritional management factors as well that we can help the cows with. if we were to go into a few of those, just in terms of things like making sure the cows aren't out of feed. That was a big thing during my time in the States. They were putting in cameras in the barns to see, at what time of night were cows running out of feed. Farmers were assuming that they had feed till the early hours, but they're often finding 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, the feed spaces were emptying out and cows were going a couple hours without feed. And that's just putting pressure then, competition to get in there, and somewhat of a simple thing to fix. If you target for maybe 2 to 3% refusals, you won't be having excessive levels of wasted feed. But you can ensure those cows are well fed, and they can kind of express normal behavior. Other things like pushing up the feed, there's good analysis there from work out of Spain. They have a very interesting study where they had 47 different herds all getting the same TMR and the same genetics, and looked at these kind of management factors, and they were finding that pushing up that feed 2 to 3 times a day was also improving performance. Not necessarily that the cows would jump up and eat it, and that you'd stimulate them that way, but just making sure they had access to it, and that they weren't under pressure or time budgets to get that feed. Feed space is another good big one. That same study, they looked at what happens if the feed space went from 500 centimeters or half a meter per cow, as that slowly incremented in 10 centimeter increases. And they were finding associations with increased milk fat and lower somatic cell count. And it was again kind of pointing towards allowing the cow to express her natural behavior, eating when she wanted, lying down, ruminating and chewing, and kind of optimizing that rumen fermentation. So lots of kind of small ones there we might overlook. There's other ones like making sure the pit face is managed well. And then there's the whole fertility, cow recycling, days in milk one that you'd probably answer better than me, James, on that one if you want to add to it.
Yeah, it's an important one, obviously, in terms of reducing the amount of stale cows in the system, and also one, I suppose, Mike, where we would see a lot of inefficiencies. We talk an awful lot about feeding the fresh cow, and that's very, very important, but sometimes the overfeeding of stale cows in the system. So how we manage them, Mike, ideally, if we can run fresh cows and stale cows separately, that's the ideal scenario, and we set up our diets accordingly then for both groups. But sometimes that can't happen at farm level, and then I suppose, Mike, it's probably about really optimizing a base diet then for the herd of milking cows, and topping up then accordingly in the parlour for those fresh cows. Is that kind of where you'd see it at?
Yeah. It is a trickier one. Like you say, ideally you'd split them if we're in a split calving system. But it is a trickier one to achieve in yards. I suppose before we dig into that, a key one too is like around the fertility is making sure your split is correct as well. You're probably contracted to a certain degree. So it's important that we have nearly a stronger control on fertility in those split calving herds, that we don't have a lot of or too many autumn cows in there oversupplying beyond those contracts, and not getting that margin on the milk. So to get that right, so your split and your proportions are solid. And then, it comes down to, there was some good work in Johnstown Castle with Aidan and Joe. They looked at kind of feed to yield versus flat rate, and the feed to yield did improve animal performance, and they picked up some economic gain as well. And it wasn't necessarily about driving on the high performers, but it was taking that kind of wasted concentrate away from the stale cows. So they did show improved performance, but a finding from it was that the cost to put in that infrastructure was high and was expensive, and that there wasn't a massive gain in it after, when you take those costs into it, the infrastructure to achieve feed to yield. So I suppose, yeah, if you could keep it somewhat simple and apply that top up in the parlour and try to back off on the amount of concentrate going to those staler cows later days in milk that you aren't getting the return or the results on. I suppose that's the key one there, James.
Yeah, absolutely. One which maybe we didn't actually touch on, and it's always a question, and it came up on the on-farm event there in Meath a couple of weeks ago, was do we need to be feeding, we'll say, a percentage of straw in the winter milk diets? Is that required? One that always raises a bit of debate, Mike.
Yes, that's a good one. So yeah, we had a great day out with Willie and Tig, Ivers, and just up in Trim, wasn't it? Just a
Yep.
couple of 100 yards away from the Boyne. So it was a good day out and great interaction. We had a good turnout. But yeah, like for that farm, like they were not including straw in their lactating cow diets. Cows were doing 693 kilos of milk solids that previous year, but there was a considerable amount of concentrate going in. But I suppose it just shows that high performance can be achieved without straw in that lactating cow diet. Um, for me, there's kind of two places it's considered. The first place is in that dry or transitioning cow. There's a kind of, I suppose, a suggestion that we should give it to close up cows to kind of control the energy going in. But there's some very good Teagasc research from back in the day with John Murphy, Joe, Stephen Butler, and they were finding that if you had moderate quality silage, there was no benefit to going in with that straw to that close up cow. When there were situations where you had really high quality silage, then the straw started to make sense. Or if you were going in with maize silage in that dry cow, the straw started to make sense. But the kind of very clear findings from that work was that if you have moderate quality silage, the dry cow, there's no need for going in with straw there. In the lactating cow, I suppose the thought process there is that these winter milk cows, they're probably towards the higher range of concentrate feeding levels, um, and that they might benefit from that bit of additional fiber, kind of stimulate rumination and chewing and buffering. But what we find is that generally our grass silages and our maize silages are quite high in NDF. Like diets formulated for the Johnson Castle herd, we're probably heading towards 35, 36% NDF. We could drop that by going harder with the concentrate, but again, back to that margin, we don't want to be going there. So if you come in with straw on top of that, you're pushing that further and you're reducing the digestibility of the diet. And we know that every mouthful of intake of that type of cow is really, really precious, and we don't want to be dropping digestibility. So sometimes straw, for me, it comes in as almost like a band-aid to fix something that's already thrown off, maybe too high a level of concentrate or too hard with the starch. You're coming in with the straw to try save or kind of cushion that, but maybe you need to go back and rectify the initial issue and kind of try to reformulate there and try move forward without the straw. So that's my take on it. Again, it's very hard to provide advice here from the office, and it can be specific to farm situation. But that's the general thought process. And from the time in the States, you see in upstate New York or the Northeast, they were shying away from including straw into those lactating cow diets.
Yeah, and maybe the final point just to finish up, is there specifics advice I suppose you'd have to farmers there with regard some of the key characteristics of the overall diet? Like, is there targets there for certain things that you want to meet, Mike?
So I think the big controllable is your forage quality. You know, like you've done an analysis there with Joe, James, and quite interestingly, like in these winter milk systems, a strong indicator of profitability in those systems is also forage utilization, just like pasture utilization in our spring calving herds. So if we can get more forage into these cows, which we do through higher quality, we can drive profit and margin in those systems. So for me, I just really emphasize targeting that high quality silage, that high DMD silage. If maize is in the situation, really focusing on getting starch up in that maize, testing it to understand what it's like, and then setting your concentrate off of that rather than just coming in with the standard level of concentrate year in, year out. So there are my kind of key ones there. And then not to forget the management side, don't be squeezing cows on the feed barrier or filling up cubicles. There's milk there to be saved or to be got as well. And that kind of management part can deliver and drive an optimized performance from it. So they're the kind of key take homes for me, I suppose, from a high level.
I suppose just to make our listeners aware as well, we had a National Winter Milk event there on Willie and Teagasc, as we said, but we'll have Winter Milk Week, which is going to have 5 farm walks around the country. So just keep an eye out for them. It's going to run from the 17th to the 21st of November, right around the country. So a lot of what Mike discussed today will be discussed in more detail, along with other obviously key management aspects of profitable winter milk production in terms of breeding and in terms of nutrient management on the farm. So keep an eye out for them, folks. And that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. My thanks to Mike Dineen for joining me on this week's show. If you have any questions about this week's episode or suggested topics you'd like discussed, you can send them to us at the following email address: dairyedge.podcast@teagasc.ie. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.